Uh, Actually, this is the story of the earth and the land. A subheading, Earth Revealed. In the beginning, the land was covered with waters until the Creator spoke. We may remember what we studied in the last class when Dr. Chilukuri Vasanta Rao talked about how the created order came into being. When the Creator spoke, the earth was revealed, emerging from within, beneath the waters. And when the Creator spoke, the dreaming happened. That's a terminology that the author does in this article. All kinds of life emerged from the land and covered the earth, forms of life with which humans have kinship, both physical and spiritual. And the land is alive with people, with ancestors, with life, with God. And when God said that the land be seen, God was also saying that be seen so that you can see. But God is also being seen when the land is uncovered. And the earth is the first and primary medium of God's self-revelation. Then we see how the earth is violated. The violation of the earth by human beings, the reason for the flood. When human beings fill the earth with violence, they violate the earth and the earth becomes corrupt. And the question now to be asked is, why does God suffer and grieve? First, because human beings God had created from the earth, they were found to be very good in the beginning, became evil, and have filled the earth community with evil. And this is the deep hurt God feels because of the deep hurt of the earth. And earth is concealed again. When does God choose to send a flood and destroy the life of the earth? If the earth is where God is and is the home of all God has created, why does God destroy this precious place? Because it is sick. It is in need of healing. When the earth is concealed by water, the situation returns to the way it was in the beginning of the dreaming. The earth was beneath the waters earlier. Now the earth is beneath the waters again. And God is beneath the waters again as well. And we also see a note of optimism. Noah finds favor in the eyes of the Lord. Noah is all our ancestors, including our indigenous ancestors. The ark is the symbol of our hope amid this ecological crisis, this flood of pollutants. We see here again that the earth is revealed again. The ark that Noah built lands on a rock called Mount Ararat. And as the water recedes, the rock appears. The rock is like the old man rock, as we have seen in the picture in Australia. God is there in the rock too. And here we come to Echo Bible, Earth Bible, Echo Justice Principle 2. When the ark made the contact with earth or the rock, the interconnection between all creatures, God and the earth, was re-established. We have studied the principle of interconnectedness, the second principle, eco-justice principle. Therefore, here, when the rock is revealed or the earth revealed, we see the echo-gesture principle 2 acting here. And here again, we hear the voice from the earth. The covenant with all living creatures in Genesis 9 is the voice of God speaking from within the earth to earth's creatures. The covenant reflects God's concern for the earth, a deep respect for the earth as a subject of permanent worth. And this covenant honors all life on the earth, not just human life. Here we can see a close relationship or interrelationship between humans and other living organisms, including the earth itself, being reaffirmed. Here we see the Earth Bible Echo-Gesture Principle 3, the principle of voice. Earth is a subject capable of raising its voice in celebration as well as against injustice. The traditional interpretations of this chapter in Genesis have often focused on the content of God's promise, never to destroy the earth with flood again. God's covenant with all living beings means that God relates to the animals, birds, and other creatures on earth as living objects or subjects, not simply as mindless objects. And here God's covenant is to preserve all species. God's voice from the earth is spoken to all life, a bond that lasts forever. God makes the same personal promise to kangaroos and crocodiles, to turtles and beetles, as to human beings. That's what the author further states. And we can see when the earth is concealed by water, the situation returns to the way it was in the beginning. And God's promise never to destroy the earth with a flood again is a significant promise. And he says, as indigenous Australian, he has the same living spirit as crocodiles and turtles. And God's covenant is to preserve all species. God's voice from the earth is spoken to all life, a bond that lasts forever. Then there is the voice of the earth. The content of God's promise for the future of the earth. Here we refer to principle 4, the principle of purpose. The universe, earth, and all its components are part of a dynamic cosmic design within which each piece has a central place in the overall goal of that design. Here we see the FO principle 4, that of purpose. God will never destroy the earth by covering it with water. The earth will always be seen, and that means God will always be seen. Will that be the same case when we think about global warming? Many of those island nations in the oceans, great oceans, will be covered with water. Do we allow the polluted earth to continue so that many places will be covered with water again? God's purpose for the earth is that it always must be seen. And that also means that God will always be seen. Then comes the idea of the rainbow of earth. The rainbow is a sign, a clear communication from God about God's relationship with earth. Another expression of the voice of God rising from the earth. And God sees the rainbow and remembers the promise made with the earth. I will remember my covenant, God says. And God sends a rainbow from the earth into the sky for all to see. Even God could see this rainbow. And the important thing about the rainbow is it comes from the earth and returns to the earth as a symbolic arc. See the difference between ARK and the ARC. Earlier we were talking about Noah's Ark, ARK, and that was God's own doing to help preserve the living organisms in the earth in the face of the flood, devastating flood. Now we see from God another response from his side and from the atmosphere itself, a symmetrical arc, ARC, reflecting all the radiant and delicate colors of the earth. And Keseth is the term, Hebrew term used for rainbow. And the rainbow just reveals how intimately God is related to the earth. That is an important aspect. The rainbow is the living expression of God's promise to the earth community. The rainbow is also an assurance for humans to see that God has done something remarkable. And therefore the rainbow is a sign, a communication, clear communication from God. It's also the expression of God's voice rising from the earth. The rainbow, however, is not only for humans to see, just as God once saw the earth at creation, found it good. So God sees the rainbow and remembers the promise made with the earth. And the rainbow points to God, who not only creates and makes covenant with the creation, but also one who remembers the responsibilities that come with the covenant relationship. The rainbow, in fact, points to our responsibility to be partners with God. And that means reconnecting what is broken on earth. The rainbow comes from the earth and returns to the earth, a symbolic arc. And here we also see that there is a balance in creation which is reflected in the seasons. And we also know that that is made possible because of the tilt that Earth as a globe has in its position. That helps the seasons to come and go and repeat. And the seasons also reflect the pattern of rain, wind, and the clouds that God promises to maintain, that we see in Genesis chapter 8, verse 22. And this author talks about my people seek to maintain that balance in creation in song, ceremony, and dance as we relive the story of a particular place where the Creator Spirit is present for us. Each place is different, but at the same time, an integral part of the harmony of creation. And as we move from place to place, we must adapt and allow ourselves to be welcomed by the new place. Among our people, formal welcome means a promise of sharing. In this place, what is mine is yours. It's not that people alone welcome us. For example, even though when the Europeans first landed in the land of North American continent, they were not welcomed by the Aboriginals in the first place. So also many will remember what happened when the WCC conference was held in Canberra a long time ago. And there was a protest, huge protest outside the venue of the WCC conference. It was staged by the Aboriginals in Australia, since the government was neglecting their voices and needs. Therefore, the Aboriginals in every place, even today, raise their voice in protest because they are neglected. So also the earth is also neglected in today's context. And some of us must have seen the recent film, JP. You may also remember that it's a story depicted about the plight of the Aboriginal people. At least that film was able to create some kind of conscience among the public and also with the government authorities, so that the voice of the aliens in our land will be heard. And the rainbow here is a sign of welcome. In response, we also need to respect and welcome each other. And we can see here a new theology being developed in the context of the Aboriginals in Australia. You can see this picture of a book, Rainbow Spirit Theology. This was actually written by Rainbow Spirit elders. For many Indigenous people in Australia, rainbow is more than a meteorological phenomenon. The rainbow is a revelation of the rainbow spirit or rainbow snake emerging from within the earth. The rainbow is a revelation of the rainbow spirit or rainbow snake emerging from within the earth. The theological significance of the rainbow snake for some Indigenous Australian Christians is outlined in this book entitled Rainbow Spirit Theology. Here is a picture that I have referred to. This is taken from for an Indigenous Australian's visual portrayal of the rainbow spirit in creation. This a book called Rainbow Spirit in Creation, a reading of Genesis 1. It was published in 2000. Here you can see the picture. The rainbow is being depicted as a symbol. At the center, we can see the rainbow spirit symbol. You can also see a snake-like character here, and this rainbow consisting of different colors are here. And the encircling circle is also representing the rainbow. And the creator spirit is represented by the circle, which surrounds the other symbols. You can see this kangaroo here and other native organisms in the Australian continent. The earth connection is also important. The covenant promise in Genesis 9 highlights the close interconnection between us, God, the earth, and all life. As interconnected members of the earth community, we have a responsibility to listen to the voice of others in the community. We listen to the land, to the earth, to our own dreaming species. The rainbow is the promise of healing, God's remembering. The rainbow is also the sign of covenant responsibility. We need to heed this sign like all the signs from the earth. And we see a lot of signs even today in today's world from nature. We have to see those signs and respond positively. One more word about the rainbow theology, spirit theology. Aboriginal culture is the first source of doing indigenous theology. Scripture and church tradition is a source that is also creatively used to illustrate this theology. The gospel is the other source of rainbow spirit theology. And the focus of this theology, rainbow spirit theology, is cosmic redemption. Not just personal redemption, but cosmic redemption. And we see that all the colors of the rainbow snake appears in the sky from the ground. And I've shown the rainbow snake also in the middle, in the picture. And rainbow spirit is like a chameleon. It changes color as crosses the land. The red of the center, we know that the center of the earth is a molten red state, and the golden color of the beach, of the sands, the green of the rain forests, the colors, variant colors of the land, these all reflect the people of this land, the wide variety. And we also know that the Olympics has a vivid emblem with 5 rings of different colors that represents the different continents of different colors of people. And we also know about the different colors. We have the rainbow people, LGBTQIA, the differentiation of gender in today's world. There also we see the rainbow. Therefore, this rainbow is representing a whole lot of things, including the our beautiful Earth, the blue planet Earth, which it is seen from outside. And the Earth connection is important. And there is a bond between each members of the Earth community, and therefore we have a responsibility to listen to the land, to the earth, and our own dreaming species. And the suffering of the earth is often considered to be an academic concept. We often teach that at the seminaries or at the universities, the pollution and ecological degradation. In reality, it is something that we need to hear and feel and see and experience, not just an academic concept. And the rainbow is the promise of healing, of God's remembering. The rainbow is also the sign of the covenant responsibility. We need to heed this sign like all the signs from the earth. And we need to think about the rainbows again. The rainbow, as we know, has multi-layered colored layers: red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, and violet. And occasionally, sometimes we see secondary rainbows also as a mirror replica of the original rainbow. A storm is leaving, and the heavy gray clouds over the land are being taken away. And we also listen to the wind, thunder, and see the lightning and also the rain. When the storm is gone or spent, we see sometimes the splendid rainbow with these great ribbons of color arching from the earth and again returning to the earth. Flood stories are not locally placed. It's a universal take on all cultures. That's why we have the Babylonian epics of flood, and which has some connection with how the biblical writers took that Enuma Elish story to depict the flood story in Genesis as well. And we also see that this flood story has some other relation with the liturgical tradition of the church as well. In 1 Peter 3, we have a reference about the flood in which Noah is the main character to explain the covenant of baptism. The baptismal covenant helps us to rehearse the long journey of God's faithful commitment to remake us from creatures living in the death-dealing image of our own violence to become God's created agents of love and compassion. Therefore, this rainbow theology also has a relation to definitely the baptismal liturgical tradition as well. Now let us move to the next chapter. Jean McPhee deals with the Abraham story in the book of Genesis. The title of the article is Chosen People in a Chosen Land, Theology and Ecology in the Story of Israel's Origin. I hope all of you could read the materials before coming to the class. And the story of Abraham or Abraham turns on two fundamental facts of human interaction with the natural world: biological and social reproduction. Let me say a few more things about Abraham narrative. If we consider the first 11 chapters of Genesis, we can understand that it depicts the primeval history or prehistory, so to say. The actual history of human beings, according to the biblical narratives, begin with the story of Abraham or Abram. And from there on, we can see the lifespan of human beings became reduced to 120 years at the maximum. Before that, that was not the case. And God's command to be fruitful and multiply in Genesis chapter 1 finds mention again in the call of Abraham in Genesis 12. Let me use the term name Abraham instead of Abram to avoid confusion, because it is only from chapter 15 that we read the name changed as from Abram to Abraham. But for the sake of our reference here, I would use the term name Abraham all throughout. The concern to be fruitful and multiply reflects the interaction of human beings with the natural environment and the interconnectedness of all beings. Again, this interconnectedness, the principle, second principle comes into play. And a noticeable shift can be seen between the primeval history in Genesis 1 to 11 and the history of Abraham in Genesis 12. One more note needs to be mentioned here is that Abraham's story is also the story of three religions. They are called Abrahamic religions. First, Judaism, then Christianity, and also Islam. All the three major religions, which are also called Fertile Crescent religions, because it emerged in the Fertile Crescent area of Palestine. And then we also see that the Abrahamic religions, they all trace back their ancestry, faith ancestry to Abraham, to be specific, in different ways, of course. And God's command finds mention again in the call of Abraham in Genesis 12. The shift, I refer to a shift here. The shift is from the primeval narratives of human creation and cultural formation as an extensive narrative of land use and human competition for that use, leading to conflicts over land and natural resources. Such conflicts we can see when we see the instance of Abraham and Lot separating, and also in the case of Esau and Jacob separating for a long period of time. And three aspects are here drawn out from 14 chapters of Abraham narrative from the perspective of eco-justice. The first is the barren matriarch, the ideology and fertility. Second is the question of the expulsion of Hagar and Ishmael. The third is the circumcision as a sign of the Abrahamic covenant. Here also we can see that the biological and social reproduction are different. Biblical Israel's theological justification for territorial claims find expression in the blessings of Abraham. The blessing or promise is also linked with ethnicity. The fertility of one group is distinguished from the fertility of other groups. Among the nations, you shall be a blessing. You're blessed so that you be a blessing to the nations. Therefore, one group is specially chosen. And reproduction becomes an instrument of colonization when we find that in Exodus chapter 23. The ecological result of biosocial reproduction leads to environmental degradation. This also results in social degradation in the form of racism, sexism, militarism, and classism, undermining sustainability and mutual cooperation. And we can see that there is a relationship here with population explosion and immigration. The migration of Terah's family from the densely populated urban center of Ur in Mesopotamia to the less populated Syria, Palestine was a result of population pressure. But now we see the reverse in order. We see the metropolitan cities swelling with population because of the added resources available and also opportunities, job opportunities being preserved. At the same time, we also see immigrants to other nations and also other parts of the nation. And also we see refugees. If we take the term used by Rabbi Chandra Guha on ecological crisis, we have seen ecological refugees as well, just as we have seen the political refugees in history. And here, in fact, the change of place or migration from Ur in Mesopotamia to Syria or Palestine was a decision that Abraham took. And the problem of Abraham narrative is bluntly stated in Genesis 11:13. That's the key in the narrative. Now Sarai was barren. She had no child. And we also see other matriarchs, Sarah, Rebecca, and Rachel also being described barren. The question is, how can a childless man found a mighty nation? God's promise to Abraham is being challenged here. Again, a land flowing with milk and honey is the promise with Canaan. And we see that there is a shortage of food in Canaan, which forces Abraham to move to Egypt. Then again, with Jacob's story, we see another migration to Egypt. Why is the difference between Egypt and Palestine? We see that the shortage is partly due to environmental factors. Mesopotamia and Egypt both are urban cultures, civilizations, which have the plenty of riverine systems. Euphrates, Tigris rivers for Babylonia, and for Egypt, they have the perennial flowing Nile River, which originates from sub-Africa. And what's the other difference between urban civilization and rural populations? The urban centers will have opportunities to store food grains, even in times of shortage, even in times of famine. That's what happened when Joseph was introduced to Pharaoh. He predicted a famine coming in Egypt itself. That was a provision by God, as we know from the narrative, Genesis narrative, that the people of Israel could be preserved there. Therefore, the shortage suggests that the famine was a result of environmental rather than socio-political factors here. And we see a recurrence of famine in the patriarchal narratives. The famine is depicted not as caused by a divine displeasure, but as a naturally occurring misfortune. Again, we see other cases of famine, especially in the book of Ruth. Also, we see a misfortune coming upon the family of Naomi, to be sure. Therefore, the population immigration myth of the frontier is a definite topic here. Again, there is a difference between biological identity and social identity. I have left out one slide. Another explicit reference to ecologically motivate behavior in Abraham's cycle is seen in Genesis 13, the separation of Abraham and Lot. And there also we see that there is a conflict between these two groups of people. And Lot selected the more fertile Jordan Valley in Canaan. This was to resolve the conflict over water and grazing rights in the fertile but fragile ecosystem of Canaan. And reproduction and the politics of colonization is also represented in this article. The childlessness of Abraham is again brought in Genesis 15. O Yahweh God, how am I to know that I shall possess the promised land? And here again, Yahweh answers in a mysterious appearance to Abraham. And here we can see a shift of concern from biological to social reproduction. In the Genesis chapter 1, what we see is the biological reproduction. Be fruitful and multiply. That was the promise and instruction given by God to human beings. But we see that there is a question of social reproduction as well. What is that? And the shift of concern from biological to social reproduction is established to secure an offspring through the Egyptian slave woman Hagar, with the ensuing conflict between Hagar and Sarah. The expelled Hagar becomes the ancestress of a great nation through her son Ishmael. Hagar, the matriarch, carries the seed that becomes a great nation. The seed of Abraham is transferred to the seed through Ishmael to become a great nation. And Howard Schultz analyzed the Israelite rite of circumcision also. We know that here is a new covenant being put in place between God and Abraham. And the priestly community has some reservations about it, and they preserve the rite as a foundational symbol of the covenant between God and Israel. The rite symbolized the fertility of the initiate, as well as his entrance into the lineage of male descendants. And we have the priestly document in Genesis with the 7 repetitions of the blessings of fertility. The incising of the male reproductive organ is seen as the preeminent mark of God's covenant for generations after Abraham, ensuring intergenerational continuity. Here we can see that Ishmael is also circumcised, including him in the symbolism of fertility. Again, there is a difference between biological identity and social identity. Ishmael has biological identity from his father, Abraham, but does not receive his social identity likewise, but receives it from his mother, Hagar. It is Isaac who receives both, and both are divine gifts. Biological identity and social identity are a little different. An Abrahamic concept of land serves as a root metaphor for the Western religious ideas of culture, religious fidelity, biosocial reproduction, human worth, and relatedness. How can we model this as a chosen people in a chosen land? Will that follow an idea of separation, distinctiveness, hierarchical relationships, and exclusiveness to a group of people, such as Israel? A worldview at odds with an eco-sensitivity that views interconnectedness as a foundational fact of ecological existence. From an eco-justice perspective, the story of Abraham is a radical challenge that some may find the concept of a chosen people in a chosen land as ultimately incompatible with ecological sensitivity. Here I am taking a picture from the Old Testament theologian Walter Brueggemann. He has also written a commentary, interpretation commentary on the book of Genesis and other commentaries as well. He is well known as an Old Testament theologian. He refers to this picture in his book, The Land, Place as Gift, Promise, and Challenge in Biblical Faith. Here we can see a triangle with God, land, and Israel. God is the spiritual dimension in this whole picture of interrelatedness. Israel represents the personal dimension, and land shows the economic dimension. And Torah or covenant is that which integrates all the three dimensions: God, land, and Israel. And Raymond de Panica also refers to such an interrelationship of triangles between God, human beings, and ecological systems. In one of his books, he refers to this as cosmotheandric experience. Cosmos, theos, and andric. Here we can see from this book by Walter Brueggemann, land is a central theme of the Hebrew Bible. Israel is given a promised land, described as good and broad land, a land flowing with milk and honey. He describes land as a prism for biblical faith. He writes, land is a central, if not the central theme of biblical faith. Land is both geographical and also symbolic. Yearning for the sense of place is a perennial human longing of belonging to a community placed on a landscape. Land is Adama, the arable land on which plants can grow and animals can graze, and Eretz, the terrestrial earth brought forth on the third day of creation. This is Walter Brueggemann. And we now come to the last article for today. Carol F. Fontaine speaks about a difficult text, difficult to explain and interpret. Forgotten voices of the earth, subjects in Genesis 49. Starting from the ground up, the Bible passes from Yahwistic monolatry, which means one God worship to the exclusion of others, to full-scale monotheism. Later in Judaism, we see that there is no God other than Yahweh. That is full-scale monotheism. And the Bible passes from Yahwistic monolatry, first proposed by Abrahamic tradition, and later Judaism develops that into a monotheism. The attempt is to find the voice of earth through the narrative of primitive nature deities, superimposed within the patriarchalizing agenda of Israel's naming for the earth community as a partner in earth's travails. The transcendental male God is placed in the background of primitive nature deities of fertility. Let me explain here a little bit. The whole narrative of Genesis actually came after the exilic period in Babylon. That's why we have some relationship with the Babylonian epics, mythical element being borrowed by biblical scholars in the book of Genesis. And also the self-identification of Israel with God as Yahweh was the first to be specific in the religious understanding of the community. That they formed with the Exodus narrative, of course. It is after they resettled in Canaan, the land of promise, of course, after a lot of warfare and conflict with the aboriginals there. And it is there that they found that their idea of a liberator God, Yahweh, was kept in superimposition with the fertility cults of Canaan. And Baal is a fertility cult deity, so to say. And here they thought and imbibed some of these fertility cults ideas about their concepts of granting fertility in the land of Canaan and not the liberator God as they experienced in the Exodus narrative. Can we say that Canaan and Israel are two different worlds? Did people exist in Canaan for some time? Of course, they coexisted. We can hear the voice of the nature gods of Canaan beneath our text. Two cultures of Canaan and tribal Israel were cradled together. Early Israel was more different than alike from its neighbors. The Bible sets out its theological problem. Who is the real God? Yahweh or Baal? Who are the real elect of the people of God? These are the questions that they were bound to answer. And we can see in the blessing of Jacob to his descendants, all of them are named at his deathbed. And tribal sayings, the land forms the tribes in their distinctive particularities and tribal identities. Sayings about Judah and Joseph probably reflects the later political ascendancy of these tribes. Joseph was in power in Egypt and Judah in the Davidic dynasty. And Judah is considered to be a lion, spoken of as a lion, Issachar a donkey, Dan a serpent, Naphtali a doe set free, Benjamin a wolf, Reuben compared to water, Joseph is rooted tree by a spring. Therefore, we have in this blessing by Jacob upon his ancestors, we can see some relation with the animate world as well as the inanimate world. The presence of predators, lions and wolves among these are also seen here as a depiction of the characters of people. Simeon and Levi are singled out to the cruelty to animals as well as humans, and the serpent Dan is a perennial danger. The writers make keen observations of earth ways, recognizing the cycles of predator and prey, fruit and harvest, birth and death. They find those same rhythms reflected in human society. Therefore, the blessings carry all of these elements from the earth. And the blessings of the earth is also important to notice here. There is a deliberate twining together of wines of blessings and the ones who give them. And it is not the national God or the Exodus Redeemer who is invoked here, but the God of the fathers, God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, with his many changing epithets and strong Canaanite overtones. Therefore, we can see some of these overtones here. God is variously referred to by some metaphors like shepherd and rock, which we are familiar with in the book of Psalms. And by the three titles, Mighty One of Jacob, God Almighty, El Shaddai, and God of your fathers. The verses offer nearly a catalog on the ancestral ways of characterizing God. What is to be noted here is the deeply earth-related nature of these blessing divinities, the bull, the rock, and perceived by later monotheists to be one God. The god Shaddai is related to Akkadian mountain, Shadu, or field, uncultivated wilderness. Wilderness is a clear theological motif in the Exodus narrative. We see again that concept coming up in with Jesus being in the wilderness, being tempted by Satan. The word is a homonym with breast also, Shaddai. Mountains are often thought of as resembling breasts. Rahmeh, the one of the womb, is one of the epithets of Asherah. Asherah is a Canaanite goddess. The Shaddai of chapter 49 is an example of the depressed divine female principle. Shaddai gives blessings of heaven above and the deep crouching below. Heaven and deep are both dispensers of life-giving waters. We know that water comes forth from the deep as well as from heaven over the sky dispensation. The Babylonian creation myth Enuma-Elish mentions the ascendancy of Marduk, the city god of Babylon, whereas the female principle of cosmos is repressed, Tiamat. The warrior god defeats Tiamat in a battle, cuts her in half, and forms heaven and earth out of her core. We can see also a parallel here in the Indian creationist myths as well. In Rigvedic hymns, we see the similar creation stories. And mountains and hills are also places where gods live. The Father's blessings are greater than the blessings of the mountains and hills of breast and womb. These have connotations from the ideas of deity in the Canaanite mythology. And what are the theological reflections based on this chapter? Earth as a subject is raised here. Reading from Earth's perspective, the recovery of Canaanite voices of blessing in Genesis 49 allows us to reintegrate our understanding of blessing as a natural phenomenon bestowed upon us and all species by Earth, rather than something originating outside of the living cosmos. Therefore, even though the blessing is uttered by Jacob upon his descendants, actually the blessings are invoked from the nature, the environment surrounding them. That's a key notion here, with Earth as the subject. I'm coming to the closure. The subject in the text is the one who sees, one who speaks, and one who acts. These are the hallmarks of a fully developed persona. The tribes see how the land has shaped their identity. Earth acts to bless, releasing the fertile power that nurses the blessing into fruition. And Earth finds a voice here, and it induces actions. It's not the tribal patriarch who bestows the blessings of Earth upon the offspring. It is rather the interplay of an interdependent Earth community that creates the blessings. El, Asherah, bull, breast and womb, father and mother, sky and deeps, sweet water and salt, all these intermingling together fashion and bestow blessing. Earth is a subject in its own or her own right. And such subjects can also refuse blessing to those who know, waste or debase blessing or its giver. Here I also refer to Leonard Boff, Latin American liberation theologian, who states this aspect in his book, Cry of the Earth, Cry of the Poor. The cry of the earth is heard along with the cry of the poor. And we also see that in Romans, we see the groaning of the created order, nature. And hearing the word of God here must also entail listening for the voice of the earth. When the deeps cry out to us in torment, we must not only listen to them, but we must act. Let me stop here. If you have any questions based on this presentation or some clarifications needed about what we have talked, it is now time.